Welcome back to the second segment of our conversation about supply chain disruption, which is a growing threat to our economy that does not seem to have an end in sight. As of today, October 21st, 2021, at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, there are 96 cargo ships anchored offshore, waiting for an open berth to begin unloading their goods. So the question is, can we rebalance the supply chains, or is our current crisis so deep in its global contagion that we might need to undertake new national priorities on raw materials, production, and infrastructure? My name is Jim Connor. Welcome to Game Changers Silicon Valley. My guest on this topic is Mike Chaney, who has over 40 years of global supply chain management experience with Procter and Gamble. In the first segment, we discuss how U.S. businesses followed two key objectives in creating supply chains. First, companies located the lowest cost for materials and production facilities. Second, they built the supply chains in a way that would support a minimum of inventory investment, also known as just-in-time inventory. If you've not seen the first segment, I would recommend you watch that segment first. Let's join the conversation where we left off at the end of the first segment about who takes the lead in resolving the current supply chain breakdown. I want to go into a couple of areas, but before we leave this one, I want to ask you if you thought governments have a role to play, or is it up to the market to figure this out?
The number one thing I'd ask governments to do is don't create a problem. Okay, let business solve it. If there's a role to play, I think there's probably a couple of things. I think continuing investing in innovation and encouraging innovation. I think innovation is what gets us out of this. And I think it's usually innovative people, smart, innovative people will figure out a way around the problem. If there's a second one, I would also say focus heavily on education, educating people right and having solid education systems, because the challenge of jobs will be even more.
What about anything you want to suggest on infrastructure? Now, I have, before your show here, we did another show with a person who was involved in distribution systems, and they were the shipper and the transportation service. And they said that both the shipping docks or the port facilities, as well as the airports, are woefully behind the times. Do you agree, or do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, I do agree with that. That is probably the third element, and one I should have mentioned is, if you fly around the world, you quickly realize that, no offense to the United States, it's my home, but we have some of the worst airports in the world. And it's amazing at how upgraded some of the other parts of the world airports are, and our roads. I think everything to do with roads and bridges and infrastructure and docks we do need a woeful upgrade. And I think the more we can invest in that, I think the better we will be in the long run, because we'll still need to distribute goods. I think the other thing too is making sure that our tax policies don't create the wrong behavior. I think one of the solutions to this is more localized manufacturing and sourcing. And it's not everything. I don't want the world to shut down. Don't misread me. I'm not a nationalist, but I do think encouraging local manufacturing, encouraging local supply of things, and not getting too focused on one business, but a diversity of businesses. And I think where you see some of our problems is where, like you mentioned, chips, where they're concentrated in one area. And let's have more of a distribution of industries around, where we have more of a balance in our supply chains.
Great. I want to move into your personal experience. I have one last question I'd love to ask this. You're the first person I've asked it to in this exact format. So Mike, if you were made king for the next 2 years with no Congress and no legislative oversight, and if you want to decline, it's obviously, but what would you do? And I just want to get your sense of that.
Well, I haven't thought about that enough, but okay. I guess, let me say a couple of things. One is I would invest a lot into the infrastructure, as was mentioned before. Mm-hmm. Second is I would try to invest into education and invest in a balanced way. And what I mean a balanced way is that the U.S. needs more trade schools. They need more people. I mean, not everybody is going to be a PhD. Not everybody's going to have an MBA. And invest into, because sometimes the hardest people we have to find are the construction workers and the operators on the line. And I can teach them computer skills, but I need a few hands-on people, and all those jobs are not going away. And I guess the third thing I would try to do is just try to have some kind of balanced tax policy that encourages a balance of investments. You know, it's great to see people getting excited about electric cars, and that's great. I think that's part of the future. I would play more of a portfolio though. I mean, hydrogen fuel cells may be an opportunity. Electric may be an opportunity. I think there'll still be a place for a gas engine. So I would try to make a more balanced portfolio of where I would encourage things to do. And, you know, frankly, I guess the last thing I'd do, I'd bring a lot of the top business leaders in from around the world and say, okay, give me some advice on what it's going to take to turn some of this around.
Well, those are good comments. I think I might be voting for you to be king if we have that happen.
Well, I'll get one vote.
You get one vote at least. Okay. So I'd like to go to your personal story a little bit and just learn how you got involved in global supply chains. Or how did you come to Procter and Gamble? Was that a smooth transition? Did you come from another company? And how did you work your way up if I may say it, the food chain to become a global manager?
Well, I started as an Indiana farm boy. So I was the first one in my family to go to college. So I didn't know anything about college or any of that, but I was good in math and science. My dad worked in a factory, and he said the only white collar people I know that are of any value to me are the engineers. So between that and being good in math and science, I got an engineering degree. And as I was interviewing, I was a chemical engineer, and I was kind of tired of petrochem by the time I graduated. And Cincinnati was not that far away. Procter seemed like a good company. And, you know, frankly, I got lucky. They just made a good impression on me, and I started there. And what I loved was the diversity of the business and the core values that Procter has. So from that point, I started in R&D. I was doing research and development. I did some engineering work, designing new processes. You know, we had juice for a while. I worked on that product. I worked on Lustra, one of our great failures, for a while. I ended up going to Jackson, Tennessee, and got involved in Pringles and did some manufacturing work, did more engineering work. We went to Belgium and bought a brewery and turned it into a Pringles plant, which some of you might not think was a good idea, but there's a lot of breweries in Belgium, only one Pringles plant. I ended up going to healthcare, and then, you know, paper for a while, Pampers. And then I ended up my last 10 years in Boston. So the more I worked I worked everything from upstream designing it into manufacturing. I had procurement for a while. I did supply chain design. So my last job was fantastic. I had the end-to-end supply chain and people all over the world. And I just fell in love with the people in the supply chain. What happens is most of the people in these big companies work in the supply chain. They're hardworking people that are just trying to make a good living for themselves, and they work their heart out. And those are the people I enjoyed being around.
Might be a slightly more challenging question. I don't mean a question, maybe more of a discussion, but, you know, surviving a corporate culture can be very difficult, you know, especially as you get older and there's new people coming in, and you were last year, or, you know, your last big success was 3, 4, 5 years ago. You're getting a little less consideration in the management circles. How did you survive that, if I can ask that, or did it not occur?
Well, first thing is, I mean, Procter has a better culture than most. Okay. And you know, we value integrity, we value winning, we value a lot of things. But yes, every corporate culture is difficult. Okay. There's always people that love you and are trying to support you and mentor you. And there's always people that are trying to step over you to get ahead. So look, I chose that I was just going to, you know, invest my life into the people that I cared about and try to make this place a better place. And I was fortunate to have really good mentors throughout my career that helped me understand how to not only take care of the people, but also how to really contribute to the business. And what I found is, in the midst of the culture that we had, you got to deliver really good business results, and you got to inspire your people. And I always believed in servant leadership. Is, you know, I had a lot of people in my last few jobs, and if I could just inspire them to do a little bit more, if I could make sure they're working on the right things, man, we would accomplish a whole lot more than me working 24/7. So frankly, that became my commitment. Look, I ran into a few people that didn't always act the right way. And what you also have to realize as a leader is I tell everybody, the young managers I'd hire, I said, look, when you get to be my age, some young hotshot's going to obsolete every good idea you ever had, rewrite all of your patents and ideas. But the investment you make in people, the impression you make on them, the inspiration you give them, that's what they'll remember. That's always what I tried to do. I was very fortunate. I got some good opportunities, and sometimes I got passed over for some things I thought I should have. And other times I got jobs of like, wow, I can't believe they picked me for this. So
that's fascinating. Very good answer. And I want to ask you just a little follow on, because you were a chemical engineer. And that's a very detailed job. You're doing research. So then you start to move along and you get recognized for your contributions and you become a manager. Now that's a big transition to move from a guy who's doing all the stuff, all the research you take. Now you're managing. And maybe it was some years ago, but I have to ask you because so many people struggle with that shift from the doer to the manager, realizing they've got to support the people under them versus them being the doer, the micromanager, if you will. You have to go through any process for that.
Well, yeah, it's always an interesting and tough transition. But I think what you have to do is I always look for people that get a kick out of letting others do it. Okay, they get a kick out of them succeeding versus me doing it. If you're one of those people that says my pride and my success in life is I did this, you may not be the management type. Okay. And we have positions for you. We got plenty of places for you, but you got to get excited about seeing somebody else grow. And, servant leadership and coaching were always the best thing. It's like, you got to play the coach, you got to be the coach on the sideline and let the other players play. And you got to correct them. You got to guide them. You got to inspire them. And I became a student of leadership is really what happened. I became, I was an engineer and I was a decent one, but over my career, most of my study, I always loved technology. I loved the newest technology. I knew how to penetrate. I loved that. I love technology. But I became a student of leadership and business. And my tie was, if I could understand the business strategy and tie the business strategy to what my organization needed to do and inspire them to do that, man, I was happy. So it was a lifelong learning for me. I spent 4 years studying engineering. I spent 40 years studying business and leadership.
That's great. I just want to toss this out to you. And I mentioned earlier, if your daughter was going to get her MBA in the next 3 months, what would you advise her? What areas would you advise her to pursue?
The two I would recommend, and this shows some of my bias probably. One is there's always a role for finance, okay, and particularly global finance. I mean, the financial rules continue to get more complicated. And there's so much that a brilliant finance leader can do to help guide a business in the right areas. And that'll never go out of style. I don't think our laws will ever get simpler. They'll get more complicated. The second was anything in the technology and innovation world. Our future is in innovation. One of the things we haven't talked so much about is climate change. But I think climate change is going to change a lot we do about supply chain. It's going to make logistics harder. It's going to make some of that long supply chains harder to manage. Some of the places that we thought were safe to build plants may not be safe to build plants anymore. We're going to be the transitions to green energy and all that. And if you study what's going on in the UK right now, some of those transitions haven't gone very well. And we're going to have to figure our way out of that. So I think anything in the innovation area around climate change and particularly energy production and how to deal with that is going to be a big opportunity.
Okay. In our little brief talk we had, I think 2 weeks ago, you mentioned that and this will be my final question to you. It's no longer, China is no longer the cheapest country in Asia to produce things. And I was not quite aware of that. I thought that China had maintained its edge, and I'll ask you to give us an update on that perception.
Well, I think, look, China has the infrastructure that makes them low cost in certain areas. Okay. But Vietnam has stepped up as a very strong. Now, look, Vietnam's small. They'll never be a major competitor to China, but Vietnam has their own capability. Frankly, India is kind of, I think, overlooked sometimes as in terms of the things that they can do. There's certain political challenges there and issues you get into, but they have a lot of capability. And I think, Southeast Asia is starting to develop in terms of their capability too. Wage wise, China's not that cheap anymore. All those countries I mentioned are lower cost from a wage standpoint. What China is trying to do, which is smart, is they're trying to invest more into innovation and more into automation so that they can stay competitive. I would also say that you have to look at supply more globally. Brazil has plenty of opportunities. Sometimes the government can't get out of their way. I don't want to offend any Brazilians, but they're very smart people, very dedicated people. Eastern Europe is rising up. So there's a lot of options out there now and I think good leadership and good training, you can develop a high-class, world-class manufacturing plant anywhere in the world. It just takes the right leadership and the right training.
Yeah, I had an experience when I was in a software company, and we had a Brazilian guy in the company, and he said, "I've got partners in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and we'll do this development work, and we can do all this stuff." And frankly, at the time, that was in the early 2000s, we were so desperate to hire programmers, and all the bigger companies had just taken all the programming talent off the market. So I said, what do I got to lose at this point? And so we tried it, and really remarkably talented people there. And I don't want to chew up time, but I'll give you this little example. So you remember how Outlook came out and you click and you drill down? We had a structure that we wanted to look like that. Now, in a normal situation, the development team would say, well, give us the specs. Okay, you want me to write this up and give you pictures? Please. And in the Brazilian, I could say, you see this? See how this works? Click, 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 drill down, drill down, drill down. I said, that's what we want. And they go, yeah, got it. Okay. And so 3 months later, reduced it. Exactly. I was just floored by that talent to just get it and be able to implement it based on that experience.
This is a big opportunity, I think, for some of us in the United States. One of the things I miss about my P&G job is working globally, because there's talented people all over the world. And my last job, I had a world-class plant in Boston. I had a world-class plant, 2 world-class plants in Germany, but my Brazilian plant was outstanding. My Mexico site was, between Mexico and China were 2 of the best sites in the world that outperformed everybody. I started up a plant in Vietnam. It did outstanding. My Polish site, if I forget them, they'll be upset at me. But Poland and Russia, there's a lot of really good people in our supply chains, and we've got challenges to overcome and things to overcome. But one of the technicians asked me one time, he said, Mike, you tend to have a voice, and wherever you go, represent us. So I just want to represent the people that are working hard in the manufacturing sites or the distribution centers or all those kind of things. They need our support, they need our help. And if we provide them the right leadership and the right tools and the right innovation, then they'll succeed, and we'll all have back the supply that we want.
What are you doing now? Just let me ask you that. Are you involved in? Are you fully retired? Or are you active as ever?
I'm dabbling around. I'm spending a fair amount of time with some nonprofits, both, and so I'm doing some nonprofit work. One in a leadership training, and one I'm on a board of a nonprofit mental health clinic, and some work in church organizations. I'm on a board of a company. I'm on an advisory board of a few companies. I'm doing some angel advising and coaching and investing here in the Cincinnati area. And I'm kind of dabbling around. I'm consulting with a few friends that want some help. So most of the time I don't get paid anything for what I do, but occasionally I do get paid for it. But I'm enjoying what I'm doing and the flexibility to invest in I tell people I work with organizations I believe in, or companies I believe in, and people I believe in. So
that's great. I should give a shout out and recognition to Scott Jacobs at the Queen City Angels. He's the executive director who made the introduction, so we could have this podcast. Scott's a great guy, and he and Tony Shipley, they run that organization, doing great work in Cincinnati. So just wanted to, since you mentioned it, I wanted to mention and thank them for that.
Yeah, Tony and Scott do a great job, and there's a really good innovation infrastructure here in Cincinnati. It might surprise a few of your listeners, but it's good. And Tony and his Scott and his team has had a lot to do with it, of just encouraging. And as I said before, I'm optimistic. I think we'll innovate our way out of the problems that we're facing if we just encourage people to think creatively and innovate and to solve the world's solutions. That's most of the good things we have around us are somebody thought about the problem and came up with an innovative way to meet that problem.
Yeah.
So,
Mike, you've been absolutely great. I just want to thank you for your time. Your insights were great, and you bring in a certain understanding and perspective that I think our audience will appreciate. I certainly appreciate it. If you're open to people following up with you for whatever reason, do you have a contact email or?
Sure. Yeah. My email is, it's my name, CHANEY, .mo@mac.com.
All right.
It shows how old I am. I'm old enough to actually have a Mac email. When I go into the Apple shop, they're like, wow, you have a Mac email? I'm like, yeah, it just tells you how old I am.
Well, like I said, we greatly appreciate it. And I want to congratulate you on the great work you've done and your continued efforts with the various nonprofit organizations and your work with entrepreneurs too. Well, once again, thanks so much. Okay, Mike.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for joining us in this episode. If you like these types of conversations, you can become a subscriber at gamechangers.tv. If you listen to podcasts, you'll find us under the title Game Changers Silicon Valley. We look forward to your engagement and interest in upcoming shows.